Cool.
Sweet.
Turn it over to
Thank
you,
you.
Emily. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and most importantly, I want this to be helpful for you all. So I'm gonna do kind of an informal presentation. And at any point, if there's a question or you want me to stop, that's more important than this little presentation that I'm gonna run through. But yeah, so first of all, super excited that you guys are interested in kind of the clinical side of things because that's totally right up my alley and why I got into wilderness therapy in Aspiro. So I feel pretty connected to that. Really exciting. Um, I'll give you a little background about myself and how I got into Aspiro because it's a little unusual. I actually studied political science and Chinese in college and thought I was going to work for the government and moved to DC, was working for the Department of Defense and just hated it. Like, was super bored, not inspired, didn't want to be in a cubicle. So I had a friend that worked for something called Second Nature. It's a primitive program in Utah. And she was like, I think you would like wilderness therapy. And I was like, all right, like I've never even heard of this. But I came out and we do like tryouts. So I did my tryout in December of 2017. It's like a week long, basically like a mock week on trail. And it's really good. So we do like phone interviews and stuff before we invite people onto tryouts. But the primary way we see if somebody's going to be a good fit for working with the Spiro is this like week-long tryout process. So I came out to my tryout in December 2017 and pretty much immediately was like, yeah, like this is what I want to be doing. It felt really right and it felt like a good fit. So yeah, I guided for about a year and 9 months. And then last October, I transitioned into this role that I'm in now, which is the recruiter. So part of what I do is like this, like talk to people about what wilderness therapy is, what it's like working for a Spiro. And then the best part of my job is that I run tryouts. So each month I facilitate this like week-long tryout process and bring people on. We do different behavioral simulations, a lot of training, and it's a good way of deciding like, okay, is this a company that I want to work for, a job that I want to do? And then it's a good, it's a good thing on our end to be like, okay, is this going to be a good fit? So that's the primary part of my job now. I don't really work with students anymore, but like I mentioned, eventually I want to go back, get my master's in social work, and then work as a clinician at Aspiro. So that's kind of more of the long-term thing. But right now, the like training about all the clinical skills that we use has been valuable for me and kind of like advancing my career and what I want to do. So it's been a really awesome experience. Obviously, I'm a little biased in my position, but yeah, Aspiro has been a pretty life-changing experience for me. So I'm super excited to talk to you guys about it and answer whatever questions you have. Cool. Yeah, so I'm gonna figure out how to share my screen. I'm not a technology person, obviously. Um, let's see here. Oh, here we go. Okay. So if I can see this. Okay, so Aspiro, people always ask like what makes it different, and the big answer is the adventure component. There's a lot of primitive programs that do like backpacking and primitive skills. And Aspiro started in 2005, incorporates adventure into the model. And the reason we do that is because it's been proven that doing stuff like rock climbing, mountain biking, it builds self-efficacy, self-confidence, and our students buy into the program quickly because they're doing fun stuff, they're learning skills, like they're having fun. So we're doing all the same therapeutic stuff, but incorporating this element of adventure gives people skills that they can transfer outside of life. So outside of life at Aspiro, which I think is cool because wilderness can be this little bubble where, people go in and it's like, say they were using drugs. It's like, okay, they're in this bubble. They're no longer doing the things that they were, but can they transfer those things outside once they go back home, once they go to a boarding school or whatever. So we started incorporating adventure, and we do, we do canyoneering, rock climbing, mountain biking, skiing. We're starting a new cross-country skiing itinerary. So it's going to be kind of like ski packing, like backpacking on skis. So we're going to test that out this winter, see how it goes. They're typically each year they're introducing new itineraries, and actually some guides have created their own itineraries. So we had this one guide who was super into crack climbing and created a canyoneering / crack climbing itinerary for Aspiro. Super physically challenging itinerary. Not that many people can facilitate it, but yeah, there's cool opportunities to like incorporate what you're passionate about, and yeah, get involved in that way. Cool. Oh, that's me. I kind of already introduced myself. That's a picture of me on trail. The schedule at Aspiro is 8 days on. So 8 days you're in the field with students, and then you have 6-day off shift. So this appeals to a lot of outdoorsy, adventurous people because, you know, you're in the field for 8 days, and then your 6 days off. You know, if you're into rock climbing, traveling, whatever it is, like you've got 6 days to go explore the state, the surrounding states. So the reason I brought that up in this moment is because it's clear this is probably day 7 or 8 on trail for me. Cool. This is what I think is the most important thing that I want you guys to take away, and that's kind of our philosophy. So there's a lot of different types of programs. A common program is called behavioral modification, and that is more of like the boot camp style. It's more of the, when you hear about wilderness therapy gone wrong type situations, it's the behavioral modification. But we're not that. We are a positive psychology program. And what that means is that we are focusing on our students' strengths and focusing on building up strengths versus changing behavior. And so what that looks like is a couple different things. The first one is that we're non-punitive. And this is incredibly important to me, and one of the things that got me psyched on Aspiro. Nothing that we do is a punishment. And that goes like to the very nitty-gritty. So like, okay, we have spices that we offer the students for their meals. We could never take away spices. If a student is refusing to get out of their sleeping bag in the morning, there's nothing we can do besides talk to them, see where they're coming from. There's no like forcing people out. If somebody's refusing to hike in the sun, we're going to build a shade shelter over them, talk to them, process. So we're super careful to make our program non-punitive so that our students are safe and that they're being taken care of. Very foundational to Aspiro, and something that I feel pretty strongly about, because I think that wilderness therapy might have this history of people getting taken advantage of, this like Wild West boot camp craziness, and that's not what we're about at all. So non-punitive. We're also assessment. And so a challenge for guides is like, okay, we're non-punitive. You know, some of our students, like, what if they don't want to get out of a sleeping bag? What can we do? And the answer is not much. You know, we can talk to them, we can see where they're coming from. But at the end of the day, we're an assessment program. And so what we're doing at Aspiro is assessing what they need after Aspiro. And so for some of our students, okay, like they come to Aspiro, they do really well, they can go back home, and we feel confident that they're going to be successful there. For some of our students, maybe home is not a great environment for them. And so they might go to like a residential treatment center or therapeutic boarding school. So what we're doing is we're kind of like this bubble where we can assess where they're at, we can assess what they need, and then we can help place them in a either residential boarding school or back home, like an environment that's going to be the most conducive to their success. So that's something our students know. They know we're not here to like, change happens naturally just being outdoors, and we're not using like extrinsic motivation or punishment to create change. We are just an assessment program. So big key to Aspiro. Strengths-based, it says there, kind of mentioned that. We're doing things like rock climbing and mountain biking to build up strengths in our students. And yeah, build that self-confidence like I talked about. High Adventure talked about that. And then the last point there is that we're a relational program. And so we feel like the most important part of the student's experience is their relationship with the guide and the therapist and their family. So as a guide, you're kind of the boots on the ground with the students 24/7. And so you have the biggest impact. A lot of students that have graduated Aspiro have written letters to their therapists saying like, so-and-so guide is like had the biggest impact on me while I was at Aspiro. So the relationship between the guide and the student is super, super important. And we'll talk a lot like in the tryout and throughout your guiding of like how you can build these healthy relationships for students that maybe don't have any healthy relationships back at home.
Hey, Emily. Sorry to interject real quick. We had a question from Colin. He said, talking about assessment, do guides sit in with or help with intakes of new participants or clients?
Yeah, so not really. The intake happens, parents will apply online, they'll meet with our like intake counselors. Students will come in, meet with their therapist, and then as a guide, you're sitting in on their therapy sessions. So you're very integrated in their therapeutic process, which was something that really appealed to me, being interested in the clinical side of things. When I found out that I could like sit in on therapy sessions, I was like, wow, I don't think I could, like with a political science background, there's no other avenue I could have that kind of like insight into what therapy is like. And that was valuable for me as a guide. I really liked sitting in on my student sessions because A, I could be an advocate for them, and B, I would get a little bit more detail on what they were working on and why they were working on it. Sometimes things are shared in a therapy session that you might not talk about when you're just like hiking with somebody. So yeah, you'll sit on the therapy sessions. Most therapists do that, but not the intake. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
It does. Thank you. Maybe you'll cover more about what guides exactly do, but yeah, I'll write some questions down for you.
Totally. Great. Okay. Any other questions while I'm here? Sweet. Okay. So again, we talked about adventure therapy. Yeah, I talked, I'm not going to go too much more into like the value of adventure because I think everybody sitting here knows what the value of adventure is. And it's something that I've experienced firsthand when you create, when you manage risk effectively, and be really intentional with setting goals before the adventure activity and then debriefing it after, and drawing those takeaways from what they did to how that relates to their life outside of Aspiro. That can be super transformational for students. Plus, we go to some really cool places. This is in Escalante, the Golden Cathedral. We do some really cool rappels, really cool rock climbs that, yeah, like even as a guide, I get pretty excited about. We have one, it's in the San Rafael Swell. If anyone's ever been to Utah, it's like 190-foot hanging rappel. And not all students are like in the place where they can do it. And some of our students do. And it's like yeah, like the ceremonies that you can do at the top and then you do it. It can be like the thing that people remember years down the road, which I think is awesome. This is our unofficial motto. We do hard things, and this applies to everything. We kind of go by the hard, easy, hard philosophy, which is like we do the hard thing now to make it easier on ourselves down the road. Could be building a shelter before the storm, could be like resolving a conflict before it erupts. But yeah, we preach this like, do the hard thing now, make your life better down the road versus do the easy thing now and make your life harder down the road. So this is kind of, we do hard things. It sounds kind of basic, but it really is the thing that just underlies everything at Aspiro. Like the reason we do hard things here, because for a lot of our students, just being outside is very, very difficult. And so we're teaching like how you can get through working hard and pushing yourself and what that means for what you can do outside of wilderness. It can be, I worked mostly with adolescent females, so girls ages like 13 through 17. And I found this to be really empowering for a lot of girls that had kind of like a victim mentality or hadn't done anything hard, didn't think they could do anything hard. I found this philosophy and way of being at Aspiro to be super transformational for them and myself as a guide. Okay. So I'm actually going to run through a typical week, and I think this might bring up some questions because this is kind of going to give you insight into what it would be like as a guide. So guides go on trail on Tuesdays, but before you go on trail from 9 to 12, we do something called in-service. And that's where therapists, clinicians, people on the field team will come in and do trainings. So for example, sometimes guides will request, be like, okay, we want to learn more about substance abuse. And so a therapist that specializes in substance abuse will come in and do an hour training before guides go on trail. This past week, we did how to put chains on a van. So it varies in topic based on what people are needing. We also did, so yesterday was Tuesday, so we did like a primitive fire starting where everyone had to dunk wood and kindling into water and then start wet fires. So that was pretty cool. Anyway, so we'll do in-service 9 to 12. Then you'll go on what we call the hill. So our field office is in Mount Pleasant, Utah, and then our base camp is 20 minutes away. We refer to it as the hill, but this is basically like a forested area where all the students have semi-permanent shelters. Right now we've got like 10 groups at Aspiro. So we've got boys 1, boys 2, boys 3, girls 1, girls 2, 2 adult groups, and then 3 groups of students that are on the autism spectrum. So all the groups have their area on our hill. As a guide, you'll go to your group. Tuesdays are usually dedicated to therapy. So therapists will be coming in, guides will be sitting in and out of sessions, and then therapists will leave. You'll spend the night on the hill Tuesday, and then Wednesday you'll drive out to your itinerary. So you could be going as far as Escalante, which is like 7 hours away, or you could be going up to the Uintas, which is a couple hours away. But Wednesday is mostly travel day, setting up camp, getting things in order, maybe doing an expectations group, kind of setting the tone for the week. And then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you're facilitating whatever it is the itinerary for that week. And I can go into adventure facilitation and who's responsible for that. But yeah, so Thursday through Sunday, facilitating the itinerary, we call it the ITIN. And then Monday, heading back to the hill, and then all day Tuesday, therapy sessions and guide switch back out. So that's what a typical week would look like as a guide. I think it's nice because it's broken up. So, you know, you've got your couple days on the hill, you've got travel days, you've got the itinerary. It kind of keeps things fresh, especially because you're going oftentimes to different locations every week. In the winter, we'll spend a lot of time in southern Utah where it's warmer. So St. George, Moab, Goblin Valley, those areas. Yeah. Any questions with what a typical week looks like? Sweet. And then another thing, so as a guide, what you're responsible for facilitating, you're super involved in the student's therapeutic process. So there were some weeks where every day, multiple times a day, I was talking to the therapist on the phone, being like, okay, I'm trying this thing with the student. It's not really working. What do you suggest? Kind of troubleshooting things. You're helping the students work on their therapeutic assignments for the week. So they'll get like a list of assignments, groups that they need to lead, written assignments, ceremonies sometimes. And so you're helping the students with those. And then the other thing is the adventure component. So on off shifts, those 6 days off, 2 of the days will offer adventure trainings. And those are paid trainings, so you can get paid to learn how to facilitate rock climbing, mountain biking on trail with students. I came into Aspiro having never done any of the adventure activities that we facilitate. So I totally started from ground zero, went to a ton of trainings, and then was able to facilitate like skiing, canyoneering, and then navigation is another one that we have. So you go to trainings, eventually get checked off to be a lead facilitator. And then once you're checked off to be a lead, you can facilitate that itinerary with students. You can still go on so I went on 2 mountain biking itineraries without ever being a lead in mountain biking. I just wasn't the guide that was facilitating it for the students. I was kind of there with the students.
It sounds like you were almost co-facilitating in a sense, right?
Yeah, right. So I'm responsible. I'm doing supervision. I'm there as a support for the lead facilitator. I actually was a lead guide for some of those shifts. So I was the lead of the group, but I wasn't the lead adventure facilitator. So still doing all the same stuff I would do as a guide, but I'm not the one like running them through the mountain bike check and teaching them through ground school. But you're still fully guiding.
And you talked about the students calling or you calling the therapist. Now, are there any therapists that are in the field with you during this time to kind of help if a student has a breakdown or something and you just feel like you're not prepared to handle that? Are there field guides that are also therapists there?
So no, we do have some field guides that are therapists, but most aren't. And when I first started, I was like, what? You expect me to like respond to all these things I've never seen before? Like, this is insane. But we do a ton of training. Like, you're not seeing that many crazy behavioral incidents in the field. They do happen. And sometimes it is stressful to respond to. But yeah, there's a lot of autonomy that you have as a guide to after you've created a plan with a therapist to kind of do it on your own. And I actually found that to be beneficial for the students, the fact that they're only meeting with a therapist once a week, because they have their therapy session, they create these goals, they create a plan for the week, and then they have the week to actually enact this plan and work on these goals, and then check back in at the end of the week and see like, okay, was there progress? Like, where are we at? Versus if they had the therapist in the field with them all the time. So I liked it. I liked it that way. My initial reaction when I found out that it was just guides out in the field was like, what? That's kind of intimidating, but no.
Emily, I have a question as well.
Yeah.
What's the typical number of staff during any field week? Is it 2 co-facilitators typically, or does it change based on the trip?
Yeah, so it changes. Our ratio is 1 guide to 4 students. So you'll never have more than 1 guide to 4. You'll also never be alone. So you're always going to have a co-guide. So the max ratio would be 2 guides to 8 students. That's pretty uncommon. If you do have 8 students, you'll probably have 3 guides. And then certain groups will be staffed with more guides. So for example, right now, a couple of our boys groups are really challenging. There's a lot of different behaviors going on, hard to manage. And so they each have 4 guides. So groups that are struggling a little bit more will be staffed accordingly. And then other groups that are crushing it, like one of our adult groups right now called K2. K2 is just like a well-oiled machine that doesn't even need guides. And so we'll put 2 guides in there and 4 guides in B3. That's, not doing so hot right now. And then typically our students, so our Vantage Point program is our student groups that are on the spectrum. They do all the same, they have the same schedule, same adventure itineraries. You could potentially, as a guide, go into a VP group just as easily as a boys group or a girls group. But VP groups will usually have more guides in them just because there's usually more support needed with things like cooking and thermoregulating.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Sweet. Good questions.
Will co-ed groups always have counselors, male and female counselors there?
Yeah. So that's a good question. All of our adolescent groups are going to be, this is going to bring up a good topic. All of our adolescent groups are separated based on gender. We have the most trans students of any program, and we are gender affirming. So if a student comes in and they identify as male and they feel more comfortable in a boys group, even if they were assigned female at birth, we'll put them in a boys group if that's where they feel safest. We've had students, and I think this is so cool. We've had students that have come in, identified as boys, asked to be put in a boys group, and then graduated the program with nobody knowing that they were a trans student, if that's what they wanted. We are really, really accommodating to whatever their needs are. And so maybe that is like kind of subtly shaving their face at resupply, like going to a separate room, doing it subtly. Facilitating the bathroom on trail can be difficult. And so what we're going to bend over backwards to make our students feel safe and welcome. And so we accommodate a lot of trans students. Our policies have kind of been evolving. So for example, we've been working on like what binders are good binders for some of our students that identify as male but still have like breasts and female body parts. We're trying to figure out how we can get like breathable binders so that they can still hike and do all the adventure activities and not feel so constricted. So we have somebody on our medical team. Her name is Sarah Sarfati. She is doing a ton of work with our trans population, and is just super huge advocate and doing really good things. So that's something I'm really proud of with Aspiro. Is just we're not rigid when it comes to like, okay, this is what every student has to do. We're going to accommodate what people need. That was kind of a segue. Anyway, so right now our groups are gendered like boys and girls. We're moving towards having non-gendered group names. So maybe it's like Juniper and Sage or whatever. That's something that's in the works. So it's not so binary. So the adolescent groups are separated by gender. And then our adult groups are co-ed. So 18 plus, we call them our Kairos groups. It's K1, which is our Kairos group, our adult group that is on the spectrum. And then K2 is neurotypical students. They're co-ed. So to answer your original question, guides, you have to have one guide of the gender of the group. So you could have a lead, in a boys group, you could have a lead that's a female, a second that's a female, and then you'd need a third staff that was male because it's a boys group. Same with the girls group. We have a couple right now. The consistent in girls 2 is this guy, David. And so he'll always have a female co-guide because he's the consistent in the girls group. And then Kairos groups will have like a female and a male staff, always, basically.
That makes sense. Is certainly during my work with Apex over the summer and taking teenagers out, it wasn't necessarily stipulation to have a guide of both genders, but wow, it really came in handy during times we needed it when we needed to split the group up for different reasons. And yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And our adolescents, you won't have both genders. That would be my nightmare, actually. Teenagers, but yeah. So it'll just be a boys group. But again, you could have a female guide. You would just also need a male guide. Yeah. Cool. These are just some pictures. Like there's Sundance, where we go skiing. That's a picture on the hill. And that looks like it's the San Rafael Swell or Escalante. But some of our different operating areas. Cool. Grit, I'm not going to get too much into this. This is just another thing that we focus on a lot at Aspiro, is like this idea of grit, persevering through challenges over a long period of time. It's a big thing that A, we teach our students, and B, I think is a really, really important quality for guides. The guides that stick around, that guide for the longest, are the ones that are really gritty and can push through hard things, because truly, this job is one of the hardest jobs. It's definitely the hardest job that I've ever had by far. Definitely the most rewarding, but it takes a lot of grit to push through weeks that are really challenging, because there are definitely very challenging weeks. So that's great. If anyone's ever read the book by Angela Duckworth, I recommend it. It's a little dry, but it's pretty good. Cool. Again, talking about comfort zone, you know, we're trying to push our students' comfort zone, also guides as well. Yeah, so that's pretty much all that I have in terms of Aspiro. I would love to hear if you guys have any more questions about more of the nitty-gritty of how we operate, our philosophy, guide culture, anything like that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So Emily, are you just the recruiter for the guide section, or is it all over for the company?
Just guides. Yeah. Okay. So I only hire field guides. I run the tryouts where we hire field guides. Somebody named Carl Smoot, he's our clinical director. He does the hiring for clinicians. Right now, we have more therapist interns than we've ever had. So a lot of our therapists have an intern that kind of is working with them, which is really cool, especially for people interested in getting on the clinical side. That seems like it has been an opportunity that's been opening up more and more. We used to only have like one therapist that had one intern. And now it seems like most therapists have an intern.
I guess that brings my question there. So what is the level of experience at which you can start working with the company there in terms of either intern or guide?
Yeah, so one girl, Lex, she was a guide for a couple summers. She just started her MSW program at University of Utah and is an intern. So she just started her program. She's not licensed or anything yet, and is one of the clinical assistants or therapist interns. So you don't need a degree necessarily. Obviously, to be a practicing therapist, you do. But some of our therapists have gotten a lot of their clinical hours, because I think you need like 1,000 hours or something. They've gotten their clinical hours through these different internships, and then have kind of once they've gotten all their hours, have like started taking on their own clients. So that's actually been the case with a lot of our therapists. Got one therapist, Hannah, who's in Boys 2, Becca, who's in our Vantage Point program. They were both guides that transitioned onto the clinical side. More than that, I would say like half of our therapists were guides. And we have had a handful of guides that have had their master's in social work and just wanted experience as a guide before they started being a therapist, which I think is super important if you want to be, and this is just my opinion, but if you want to be a therapist in wilderness therapy, I think it's valuable to have the guiding experience because you are working so closely with guides.
And Emily, what do folks need to have to be a guide with you? What would you say are your that you look for applicants for being a guide? Yeah,
I laugh just because it's vague, you know, like you have to be 21, you know, you don't even need to have a college degree. It's more qualities. So it's compassionate people, it's gritty people. I think with Aspiro in particular, being able to creatively problem solve, because you are out there and you do have a lot of autonomy and you are going to run into challenges. Guides that are flexible and can kind of problem solve in the field do really well. And then people that can embrace chaos, I think, do really well, because oftentimes it's super chaotic. And so guides that kind of like get that energy from, you know, the chaos do super well. One of my supervisors, he was the recruiter for me, and now he's a field director. He was like, I think guides that do the best have a little bit of cowboy and cowgirl in them. And I think that that's kind of the best way of describing it. Like getting down and dirty, like the chaos, like, yeah.
So on the guide side, do you all invest into like team building for the guides? Like, so if you're out in the field, do you invest that before going out in the field? Do you invest that time into doing team building exercises? So that way, if you know you are out in the field and it's very exposed and you're having to face these challenges, so you know guides have to learn to lean on each other. So do you all invest that time into creating that team mentality in your guides?
Yeah, the community is so important because this is your lifeline out in the field. Like sometimes in a sea of insanity, you look at your co-guide and they're like the only pillar of anything that makes sense. you know? And so having a strong guiding community is so important. And so there's things, so what I'm on is called the support and development team. And there are things that we do to kind of facilitate. It's been really challenging in COVID, but we do things to facilitate the guiding community. So for example, today from 4 to 5, guides just got off trail yesterday. And so we do something called guide development, and we're just going to go to a park and talk about challenging things in the week. And we'll usually do that the Monday before guides go on trail too, to kind of create plans like, okay, what's a ceremony you want to lead this week? Whatever. But just kind of like a space for people to connect with each other, talk about what's going on with them. Because like this job can be pretty heavy and a lot of processing needs to happen. And luckily, most of the people that work at Aspiro are processors. You know, we like talking about our feelings. And so, yeah, we have a lot of venues to kind of create those spaces. I think adventure trainings are really great because a lot of times they're out of town. And so we'll all camp together. So we'll spend all day Thursday learning how to canyoneer. 5 o'clock, training's over. You know, people will bring out beer, like whatever, build a bonfire, chill, just hang out, kind of bond, and then do another day of training the next day on Friday. So for me, when I first started Aspiro training, I would just go, I was like, okay, I'm kind of interested in these adventure activities, but I really want to make friends. So I went to all the trainings. So those are really great opportunities. And then some of the trainings will just be like adventure trainings. So we're doing a Moab adventure training in a couple weeks where we're going to go down to Moab, and basically the goal is just to have fun. And some people mountain bike, some people will rock climb. But yeah, it's more of like a bonding type thing. Does that kind of answer your question?
It does, yeah. I facilitated a lot in the past, and so that was something that we had to definitely work on, was making sure that all of the team members were on the same page and processing and communicating properly. So I was just curious.
Yeah, and I think with this group of people, community kind of creates itself really naturally, especially in the winter. In the summer, we have double the amount of guides because our student population doubles. So a lot of people that are like in school will just go for the summer. But in the winter, the community gets smaller, it gets tighter. Most people that have guided a winter at Aspiro, Sally, I don't know if you're in this boat, but we'll say that it's like the preferable season to guide, even though it's more uncomfortable, just because your community is so tight. And same with the students.
Yeah, and I was actually going to say, you know, one thing that I really liked, as Emily was talking about, is just the small community. I know I work typically with the Kairos community, which is the adult community, and we had the same people. We're typically, I'd say 80 to 90% of us were only working with that community and only working in that group. And so it was nice because, I mean, there's probably at that point maybe 6 to 8 of us consistently working together and knew each other. And then there was one winter where I worked with the same guy, Kevin Owen, who you probably know, Emily, who is like, he is my jam, man. Yeah. And we worked together on and off for probably 7 months straight. And I mean, he was my best friend. We could look at each other from across the room and know exactly what was going on with the other person. The community that we built was great, and he's still one of my greatest friends. So I think that piece of it is really, really great as you start to build a community and you're not building new relationships every time you go out on trail. You're starting where you left off, essentially, and continuing to build community from there. So that's one thing that I like about Aspiro, you know, compared to other places, is that you can build a smaller community within the community and get to know a lot of other guides really, really well.
Yeah, I think like, I would love to say that like the students are what's kept me going, or like how rewarding the work is, but truly it's the community at Aspiro. And it honestly, we kind of joke, it makes it hard to leave. Like when people quit, we're like, oh, you'll be back. You know, it's a really like almost addicting thing to be a part of, because it's like like-minded, compassionate, really empathetic, just adventurous, badass people all together. And I haven't been a part of anything like the community at Aspiro at all. So yeah, it definitely keeps people hooked.
Emily, I think community is part of the answer to this question, but I'd be curious to hear from you about how you manage burnout in this profession. You know, this type of outdoor leadership, that field is kind of notorious for really fast burnout because of the physical exertion paired with that compassion fatigue. So how do you personally manage that? And then how does Aspiro, beyond community and training and things like that, how else do they support their staff in that way?
Yeah, we do free therapy through the employee assistance program. And so on people's tryouts, like as soon as people start as a guide, I'm like, here's this resource, please use it. Even before you think you need to, just have somebody to talk to. So huge advocate of therapy. Love that we have that. So that's one thing. I think just by virtue of doing a job like wilderness therapy, you've got some stuff to talk about and process. And so, yeah, therapy is a huge way of taking care of yourself. And on top of that, I think what I've noticed for myself and for guys is that the people who know how to meet their needs on their 6 days off well are the ones who can stick around. So I've seen it with guides who they've been doing hard things for 8 days in a row and they don't want to do hard things. And so a lot of us have negative coping skills. And so some people kind of just slide into the easy negative coping skills like drinking or partying or whatever it is. And it feels good in the moment on your off shift. And it's not the kind of things that are like filling up your cup and making you able to take care of other people, if that makes sense. And so I always tell people that you need to find a balance on your off shift. So like I would need a day by myself. I would need a day focused on like my relationships, because it can be easy to neglect like catching up with friends because, you know, you're out of service so often. You're hard to track down if you work in wilderness therapy. So like cultivating relationships, doing something adventurous, pushing myself outside of my comfort zone, because that's really important too. That you're also pursuing your own adventures and pursuing your own goals outside of work. So work is not all consuming. And then just like watching The Bachelor and making cookies, you know, like that, like it sounds super basic and I did it every week. You know what I mean? Like whatever it is that you need to do to take care of yourself, I think is important. Striking that balance. Some people would go super hard on their off shift and be like, I'm just going to send it in the creek for 6 days in a row. But then they just wouldn't necessarily have taken care of themselves in the way they needed to. So that balance, super important. Therapy, super important. And what else would burn out? I think like doing the best you can to put your week behind you. And so do the processing that you need on Tuesday. So when guides come off trail, we do individual debriefs where you just debrief your week with your co-guide team and somebody on support and development. And then we do a group debrief where everybody debriefs together. And so getting everything out in those spaces so that you can go have your off shift to yourself and not be thinking about students and weird things that happen on trail. Yeah.
And I would jump in, and Emily, tell me if I'm wrong on this, but one thing I would also say about that, Jacqueline, is I know when I worked there was, you know, being encouraged to take a shift off, you know, every once in a while. Yeah. And so the good thing about that is when you take a shift off, you get almost 3 weeks off. And so I think, you know, making sure that every year you're taking several shifts off so that you're just spending more time with your family and doing your own thing. It's not just a 1 week on, 1 week off, 52 weeks a year, that you have a little bit more of a break. And so I know when I worked there that was, you know, encouraged to avoid burnout for sure.
Totally. Yep. 100%. And right now my goal, and we've actually achieved it for the first time in 2 years, which is to have a surplus of staff on each shift so that people can take weeks off every week. And so for the last couple weeks, maybe the last month, before trail, we'll say, hey, does anybody want this shift off? And usually a couple people will be like, me. And then we can give them that time off. And so it's not like people are being forced to work when, you know, their feelings burn out or whatever. I definitely took shifts off when I was guiding. It was super important.
That brings up my question there. So what does employment there look like in terms of what sort of commitments are you guys expecting in terms of time on versus time off, seasonal, not seasonal, second
Yeah.
jobs?
So right now we're hiring for full-time guides that want to commit to a year. We don't have any sort of contract. And the reason is we don't want to force people to guide past when they're serving the students. So if you are totally burnt out and done at 8 months, it's not serving anybody to have you stay for 4 more months, if that makes sense. So there's no written contract, but the hope is that guides stay for a year, because the more experience you have, the more valuable you are, and the better experience our students are having. Experienced guides they're good for culture, they're good for mentorship, and they're really great for our students. So yeah, we hope guides stay for at least a year. But then in the spring, we'll hire guides that are just for the summer season. So just like June, July, August, when our student numbers double. So we'll have full year-round guides that we'll hire like in the fall, winter, and towards the end of the summer. And then in the spring, we'll just be hiring seasonally. Does that make sense? So if we have a tryout like right now, our November tryout, we're hiring full-time. Starting in April and May, we'll just be hiring seasonally.
Emily, what is your what's the onboarding process look like when it's, say a candidate goes from they have a successful tryout from that point to when they beat their first trip?
Yeah. So it depends. So because our staffing is so like in flux, depending on how many students we have, sometimes people will do their tryout, and then like in my case, I did my tryout beginning of December and then started a month later in January. So some people really want to start right away, and they can usually do that. Some people will want to start a couple months out. We can also accommodate that. But yeah, once you're done with your tryout, you'll meet with HR. We've been doing it over Zoom since COVID, but you'll do a defensive driving course. You'll do some verbal and physical de-escalation training through Aegis. So we have a couple people, myself included, that are certified Aegis trainers, and we'll do these Aegis trainings that you need to do before you start HR stuff, and then yeah, but that's pretty much it.
And Emily, what's your salary range right now for field guides, and what do folks need to do to get increases in that salary range?
Yeah, totally. So it's cool right now. Your starting rate is negotiable, and so with previous experience so either in the outdoor ed, like a lot of you guys mentioned having outdoor ed experience, that's qualifying, and then also in mental health. So if you've worked at a residential treatment center, something like that. With no prior experience, you start at 140 per day, and then after your first 3 shifts, go up to 145. You're eligible for your first raise. That's a performance-based raise at 6 months. And then you're eligible for a raise every 3 months after that. So usually guides that start at the 140 will be making 170 or 180 at their year mark. People with experience can negotiate like starting at 150, 160. We've had people come from other wilderness therapy programs that have started more in like the 170, 180 range. But it's flexible. That's a super new thing. When I started guiding, I started at 130 and then stayed that way for a year. And so this is, it's moving in the right direction of being more flexible with compensating people for their experience.
I have one question. So as far as guides on their days off, so let's say that I wanted to work there, and I live in Denver, and I'm probably not going to leave Denver for a little while, but I would love to commute there. So do you have anybody that's on your staff that has ever done something like that before, where they just commuted back and forth between I know Sally's smiling because I know she did it a little bit. But can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So one guy on my shift when I was guiding, his name was Sam. He lived in Denver. And so he worked doubles. So double is when you work for 2 weeks on and then take 2 weeks off. And because like he didn't want to have to drive to and from Denver, because that kind of takes up like 2 days of his off shift, he exclusively worked doubles and then commuted to and from Denver. And he did that for like a year and a half.
So
I
that on
personally
that
found
sense-
rough.
And
So
that's
on that
exactly
sense-
what I did. That's exactly what I did. And I did it for, I don't know, 2.5 years, a 6-hour drive every other week. And it was great. It was totally fine.
Mhm.
Sounds more my style, definitely. Too much
Same.
driving.
Same here.
Yeah, I don't know if I could do that, but yeah, that's great. It's cool that some people can and have that flexibility, because I know Sam owned a house, and so he didn't want to have to move to Salt Lake.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm. Cool. These are all really good questions. And something I just want to say for you all before we wrap up is so typically if you're interested in applying, you do it on our website, and then you'll get forwarded to HR, who will set up an initial interview, and then I conduct the second interview and invite people onto tryouts. If any of you all are interested in applying to be a guide, you can just reach out to me directly. So I can either give you my info, or Sally, you can send it out. But I would just want to talk to you on the phone, do like a 30-minute, really informal get to know you interview before inviting you onto a tryout. So you could kind of skip that initial application and initial phone interview, and we could just do the interview and then go from there. So if any of you are interested in that, yeah, Sally, if you could send out my email and phone number. Oh,
I just put it in the chat for everybody, so you should be able to just go right to the chat and copy paste it.
Oh, a chat. Okay, perfect. And maybe I can add my phone number here. Yep, and then I'll add my phone number. I will warn you, I am out of service often, and so I will get back to you via email. It might be up to 8 days if I'm facilitating a tryout that week.
Jacqueline, did you have something? Thought I saw you jump in there just a little bit ago.
Yes, I have one last question.
Yeah.
Do you do any LGBT specific programming?
We don't, but we do have a therapist. Her name's Lee Ullencott, and one of her specialties is LGBTQ population, and so she will get a lot of our non-binary, trans students, and so her group is girls too, but they've renamed themselves a lot of times. That was the consistent group that I was in, and so most students identify as non-binary or students that are trans. It was like this beautiful rainbow group, super diverse, just quirky group. So that was kind of like the closest thing, was Lee, and the fact that she, like, we would do a lot of groups that were specific to LGBTQ, and like the way we facilitated things sometimes, yeah, would just be more catered towards that population.
Cool, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Cool. That's all I have. And then now that you all have my email, again, Colin reached out. Feel free to reach out and email me. Any questions if things come up. Yeah, after we get off.
I do have one. I think I had a question for you, Emily, but we can do it maybe like a one-on-one. I wanted to talk about like incorporating how you would incorporate something with my background into the wilderness therapy aspect.
Yeah, totally. Does anybody else have a therapeutic recreation background? Okay, so maybe we can do that one-on-one.
I mean, if you have time right after this, we can just do it then.
Sweet.
Okay.
Yeah, if y'all want, I could just leave the meeting open and y'all can chat as long as you want.
Sweet. Let's do that.
Cool. All right. If there are no more questions, Emily, thank you so much for taking the time to talk everybody through it.
Yeah.
Students, thank you so much for questions. That was awesome. Like I said, this is recorded. We're going to share it on social media. There'll be a link available to the cloud, and then we'll have it downloaded to a YouTube channel as well. Emily, thank you again. That was awesome.
Yeah, thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.
If anybody else wants to stick around and talk a little bit afterwards, please feel free to do so. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.